Hello and welcome. In last week's video, we looked at creating drum tracks using the drummer in Logic Pro X. This week, we're going to take it a step further by looking at mixing those tracks using the producer kits. So let's get started. All right, well, we're going to start by creating a drummer track. So I'm just going to go create. And now I'm going to go over to my library. And here's where we can choose our different drummers. For this, I'm going to go to R&B, and I'm going to choose my good buddy Benny here. And I'm just going to loop these 8 bars. So right now, this loop sounds like this. And now, if we go over to our mixer, you notice we only have the one fader. So right now, all we can do is control the volume for the entire drum kit, and we can throw some plugins on the entire drum kit as well. But what if we want to tweak the mix a little bit more and adjust the individual drums? Well, we can do that using producer kits. So to get to the producer kits, we're going to once again go to our library here. So these are all the different drum kits we can choose. But if we go to the bottom, then we have these producer kits. And you'll notice there's a producer kit for every one of these regular kits. So the Motown Revisited also has a Motown Revisited producer kit with the little plus sign. So now if we select the Motown Revisited producer kit, now in our mixer, you'll notice this little arrow here. And if we hit the arrow, now you'll see we have a fader for each microphone of the drum kit. We got 2 for the kicks, in and out, 2 for the snares, top and bottom, hi-hat, toms, some room mics, etc. Now you notice there's already some plugins already loaded on the producer kits, and some of these will have more than others. So for example, if I choose a different kit, let's try this French Connection, you'll notice a few plugins in some different spots. And this fake machine has quite a bit more. Now, if you go all the way down to the bottom, here you can have a totally unmixed kit. So you can start completely from scratch if that's what you want. I'm going to go back to our Motown Revisited, and we can always remove some of these plugins if we don't want them. So I'm going to close the library for now. So what this producer kit's created is what's known as a track stack. So there's a group of tracks found within one that creates the stack. And as I showed before, you have this arrow here to open and close the stack. You also have that same arrow up here to open and close the stack. So what's basically happening is all these tracks are being sent to a bus. So you can see here under output, all the tracks are sent to bus 2. And if we look at the input of our main track, you'll see the input is bus 2. So all these tracks are getting sent to this one track. So if we mute this track, we won't hear any drums. But if we unmute, we'll hear everything, and we can mute any tracks within the track stack as well. Now, one of the things I like to do when I'm dealing with multiple microphones per drum, so for example, for the kick and the snare, I like to create a bus for each of those so that I can mix them together. So I'll show you what I mean. So for the kicks, for example, I'm going to select both of those. And right now they're outputting from bus 2. I'm going to click here, go to our buses, and I'm going to select bus 4, which is going to create a new bus. So now you'll see over here, this aux17 has an input of bus 4. So I'm going to rename this kicks. And now if you turn on automation, then you'll see your bus will show up in the arrange page here. So I'm just put these to the top for now. And the next thing we got to do is change the output of our kicks. So right now we have these two kick tracks getting sent out to bus 4, which is this track right here. So if I solo this bus, you'll just hear the kicks. But this track is not yet getting sent to our main drum group, which is right here. So for that to happen, we need to send the output here to bus 2. So I'll click here. I'm going to go bus 2 and go to our Motown Revisited. And then now when I solo the kicks, you'll see signal going to here as well. And I'm going to do the same thing for the snares. So highlight my 2 snares, click on the output. I'll do a new bus, so bus 5. That'll create a new bus over here. I'll rename these snares. I'll turn on the automation just so that ends up, there we go, in my range page. And then now, again, I'm going to change the output to bus 2, Motown Revisited. So now I've got my snares. Let me just move this to the top so that this shows up here as well. There we go. So now I got my kick and my snares both grouped. So what I like to do is we'll start with the kick maybe. I'll solo this, bring these kicks all the way down, and then you'll want to decide which kick is going to be your main kick sound. Usually the kick in, you're going to get a bit more punch from that, and the kick out, you might get a bit more of that bass sound. So you're going to want to blend those to taste. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, that's pretty good there. And then now that I have these grouped together, now I can do all my processing just on the one track. So I don't have to put a compressor on each of these tracks or an EQ on each of these tracks. I can just do it once right on my kick drum. So I'm going to start by loading in a compressor. I'm going to load in my Slate virtual mix rack. And let's check out one of their presets here. Let's go with kick punch. So you see here we have a fairly slower attack and a quicker release. So that's going to allow the initial punch of the kick to come through because the compressor is not going to kick in right away. And at the same time, it's going to release quicker. So we're going to have a nice punchy kick. Now, the setting I am going to change is the threshold. So this is going to adjust how much of the kick drum is being compressed. I usually aim for around 2 to 3 dB of gain reduction. So I'll hit play and I'm going to adjust the threshold. And there we go. So I just dialed it in just to be around a 3 dB mark. There's already a little bit of makeup gain. So since the compressor is bringing down the volume around 3 decibels, you'll sometimes want to add a little bit of gain to make up for that gain reduction. So right now we have 2.5 dB, which is right around the amount that we're taking out anyways. I'm going to close this for now. Let's take a look at a little bit of EQ on this as well. So again, I'm just going to load EQ directly on that bus track that I created. Now I'm going to press play and I'm just going to sweep the frequencies and see if there's any frequencies that I like, maybe just to add a little bit more punch to this kick. So there I just added about 3 dB at 560 hertz. That just gives it a little bit more punch that I think goes well with this kind of funk drum kit we're going with. If you wanted to get more bass out of your kick, then you'd be looking a little bit lower down here. So I'll go ahead and close this. And now let's move on to our snares. Now there's a few plugins already on our snares here, so I'm actually going to get rid of these. Now, similar to the kicks, I'm going to blend my two snares together. Now the top snare is usually going to be my main sound, and I'm just going to blend in a bit of that bottom snare, which is going to have a lot of that high-end information. Okay, let's go with that. And now once again, I'm going to load in my virtual mix rack. And let's maybe start with the snare punch preset. Now this is similar to the kick preset we used earlier, but it has an even slower attack and similar release time. So again, I'm just going to dial in the threshold around the 2 to 3 dB range. That's pretty good right there. Now let's add a little bit of EQ to our snare. So there I just cut out a little bit of the low end. Wasn't really necessary in this case, but sometimes you'll get some of the kick bleeding through and you might just want to clean a little bit of that up. And again, I just did a little bit of the higher end here just to get a little bit more punch in the snare. Now, before we move on from the snare, let's add a little bit of reverb to the snare. So with this producer kit, there's actually a reverb already loaded in here, which is the Space Designer. So that's on bus 3, you can see here. So if I go to my sends, to bus, and then bus 3, and then we'll see how this sounds. Now you can hear that kind of spring reverb type sound. Now if we want something a little bit cleaner, we can look at changing that. Let's try this drum plate. All right, let's go with that. Now for the overheads, I don't usually compress the overheads, but I will do a little bit of EQ on those. So let's check that out. For now, I'm also just going to mute the reverb that was originally put on there. Okay, so there I just cut out a little bit of the kick there and just brightened up just a little bit. Let's close that. For For the hi-hat, there's already a boost in the high end there. We could put a little bit of a cut on the bottom if there's anything that's bleeding in, but let's take a listen. All right, we'll just leave that like that. One thing I will do with these toms is pan these a little bit. Now, one thing when you're mixing drums is you have to think about, do you want to hear it from the audience perspective or the drummer's perspective? So the drummer's perspective would be if you're sitting behind the kit, and in that case, this hi-hat would be panned the other way. Now, by default, most of the Logic drums are panned audience perspective as it was before, so this was panned as if you were facing directly in front of the kit. So for now, I'll stick with the audience perspective. The high tom in that case would be panned a little bit to the right, mid tom a little bit to the left, and the low tom, I could go all the way to the left or somewhere in between. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the volume on all the tracks except for my snares and kicks. I'm going to bring down my kick and snare buses. And now I'm just going to slowly bring everything up until I have a nice balance level. So now I got a nice balance between my kick, snare, and hi-hat. There's only one little tom fill at the end, so we don't hear very much of the toms. Now I'm also going to bring in the overheads. Okay, so I brought in the overheads and I brought down the reverb a little bit from where it was originally. Now we're left with the rooms here. So one cool thing that I like to do is actually over compress the rooms and blend those in a little bit. So for that, I'm actually going to demonstrate on this leak track. So we'll just solo this track so you can hear what it sounds like. So it almost sounds like a distant kind of room mic. So for this, I'm going to load in, once again, my virtual mix rack. And you can do this with any compressor, but I'm going to load in this VG Stress. For this, what you want to do is set a really high ratio on your compressor. And this one in particular actually has a nuke setting, which will do just that. So if I go to my presets, once again, there's actually drum room nuke. We'll go there and you'll hear what that sounds like. So I just turned up the input a little bit to give me some more gain reduction, but you can hear how that you get this kind of gritty, more in your face type of sound. As I mentioned, you can do this on any compressor. So for example, on this one, you would crank the ratio all the way up to 10 and then bring the threshold down until you see the meters compressing quite a bit. So 5 to 10 dB. And you'll usually want a relatively fast attack as well as a fast release. I can close this for now. And when you do this, sometimes it'll bring out some unwanted room sounds. So I'm going to bring my EQ to clean that up a little bit. So I'm not sure if you could hear a bit of that ringing snare, but I just kind of brought that down a little bit. And I might actually clean up a little bit of the low end, so I might bring this down a little bit more too. So now I'm going to blend that in with the rest of the kit, and we'll see what that does to it. So you can see that just adds a lot more kind of grit to it, makes it stand out a lot. I can do a similar thing with this Room B mic. Although that seems to just be the hi-hats, so there's not a lot there. And same with the Room A. I don't think there'll be anything in this one. Yeah. So that'll depend on the different producer kits you're using, whether or not you're getting much in these Room A or B, which is why I use the leak on this one. Now, the last thing I'll do is I'll just do a little bit of compression on the entire kit itself. So remember, every one of these tracks is getting sent back to this bus 2. So right now we've already there's an EQ loaded in there, which all it's doing actually is just boosting everything a little bit. So I'm just going to get rid of that EQ. And this compressor, I'm going to get rid of that compressor as well. And I'm going to load in this FG Gray that I like a lot. But again, you can use any compressors. So you can use this with the stock Logic compressors as well. So now just going to load, going to start with my punchy mix preset. You might sense a theme here. I like my punchy mix. So you'll notice again, the attack is fairly slow. The release is fairly fast. And I'm just going to adjust my threshold. Now for this one, I'm just going to compress it just around 1 dB because we already have compressors on a kick and a snare. So we don't need to overly compress the entire drum kit. And there you go. So there's a quick mix on our drums that we've used using the producer kit. So we have full control over all of the drum mics. We've applied some EQ and compression to our kicks and snares. We've added a little bit of reverb to our snare. And we've overly compressed our leak track just to give that a little bit more punch and grit to the overall track that we just blended that in just a little bit. Now, just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to load up a new drummer track. Let's go with the exact same one. I'm going to load in our Benny Motown, and we can compare our producer kit that we just mixed just to the regular unmixed drum kit. Just going to rename this quickly. And we can compare the two. So I'll let you decide which one you prefer. Thanks for watching. I hope this video encourages you to dive into your drum tracks a little bit deeper and to start creating your own drum mixes. Don't forget to download your free Logic Pro X hotkey cheat sheet by following the link in the description below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.